Welcome in to today's session where we'll be going through content creation with Copilot. Now, my name is Michael McNally, and I'm a learning strategist with the Evolve 365 team here at Planet Technologies. Throughout our session today, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat in our meeting and let me know. Hopefully I can help you out. Or if you just have any thoughts or something you'd like to add to the conversation, feel free to put it into the chat as well. Love to hear from you. So our session is going to be pretty straightforward today in what we're covering, but there's going to be a few different things you're going to see. So we're going to start off with a bit of a Copilot chat overview. And Copilot chat can be found all over the place within the Microsoft suite, especially on the M365 landing page. So we're going to see how that experience works for us. And then we're going to jump in and see how we can create content with Copilot. So how can it help us with the work that we're doing throughout the day? So whether that's in an existing application, maybe we're giving it some files to look at to help us build content, or we're just going into the chat and having a conversation and hoping that it can help us build something from there. And we'll have some tips for writing effective prompts throughout the session as we go along. Now, being safe with AI-powered chat. So AI is a big buzzword right now. I'm sure we've all heard it in a bunch of different capacities. But it's just incredibly popular, and we're trying to find ways to bring AI, and regardless of the tool we're using, obviously we're showcasing Copilot today, but trying to find ways to bring AI into our workflow. So whether we're summarizing lengthy documents or complex documents, or we're having it help us create professional content, there are a bunch of different ways that we can bring AI into that conversation. So I do want to emphasize that these tools are meant to be assistants, not things that we can just set to autopilot. So we can jump in and really use it as a tool within our tool belt to hopefully help us in the work that we're doing. But I'd say we're not going to fully rely on it to do everything for us, just because we want to make sure we have that human oversight in what we're working in. So as our slide says here, Copilot is leveraging the advanced capabilities of the latest large language models, or LLMs, and it helps us efficiently summarize those documents as mentioned, have some professional customer-ready content, and even helps us generate content like presentations, articles, emails, and more. It's especially important when you are using AI tools for the work that you're doing, that you're using approved tools. So your organization may have different definitions to what is approved. But when we take a look at Copilot, for example, we want to make sure that we're using all of the licensed versions of Copilot that are going to be appropriate for your organization. So our exploration through AI today and the work that we're doing is going to happen minding GCC, or the Government Community Cloud. So if you work for a US government agency, maybe federal, state, or local, or a contractor supporting those, there are a few different clouds you can work within, but if you're not handling defense-related data, you're most likely within GCC. Centering our M365 work in a GCC-hosted tenant ensures data stays within US borders and is managed by screened US personnel. I want to make sure I get all the notes right here. So it also meets higher compliance standards such as FedRAMP High and CJIS, which are critical for government operations. So the key takeaway here is GCC offers just stricter data residency and personnel requirements compared to the enterprise licensing, or especially the public kind of free version of these different tools. So what could this mean to you? Well, it means features probably roll out slower than those we see in the commercial environment or the advertised experiences they might see out there. So even if you're taking a look at some Microsoft documentation, they're going to lead with the latest and greatest that you just might not have yet, but it's probably coming down the line. Now, Copilot responses generated during this session are preceded within your GCC tenant and are not used to train public AI models. So that means that you can feel secure in the prompts that you're using, are not going to magically show up and help future people who are using these tools and helping in their responses. So there is a boundary that is set up there. If you see my screen flash, I'm just making sure that my demo environment doesn't log out on me, just so we're in the right environment today. So the first experience we'll talk about is Copilot Chat. And I'd mentioned that this is a tool that's found in a number of places around the Microsoft suite of applications. So it can go beyond just keyword-based search. So it's more than just like a Google or a Bing search to look up something quickly. It's more of a conversation. It's a tool that can help you build things or better learn things or better analyze things, just depending on what your inputs are all about. And as you start to gain more and more confidence in using these AI tools, your prompts will get better. So it's not just going to be the simple searches you might feel you're going to start with. It'll eventually turn into these more well thought out prompts that have a very defined goal. So Copilot Chat acts like a personal work assistant for you to bounce ideas off of and incorporate into your workflows to speed up these everyday tasks. So whether you're asking it to review something for you, or you're just trying to bounce ideas, maybe brainstorm, this tool is there in a conversational way to help you out. And today we're going to focus on content creation with Copilot. But beyond creation, we have powerful capabilities to summarize large amounts of information and provide suggestions and insights on existing content. So we have Copilot as a drafting partner. So Copilot Chat helps you when you don't know where to start. This is actually a way that I like to use Copilot a lot, is maybe I have an idea of what I need to build, but I might need a few jumping off points. So I'll give the general idea of what's happening, and then we'll see what Copilot can suggest. Maybe need a first draft of something. So this is, again, one of those starting points, but it helps you with understanding, all right, this is one way of putting it together. How might I change this? Or maybe just need some ideas or structure or variation to existing ideas. And you also stay in control. So Copilot generates suggestions, but you're still the driver of that conversation. So you decide what gets used. Everything inside of Copilot is just going to stay there until you decide to maybe copy paste it out into another experience or use it in your own presentations or discussions later on. So where to find Copilot? I mentioned this already, but there's a number of different access points for jumping into this tool. At the most basic experience, you would just look for a Copilot icon, probably inside of the Office Office website, so office.com, and you're able to access the chat right there. But you might also see the Copilot icon in desktop applications that you're using, mobile apps if you have access to those within your work licensing, or integrated within Outlook. And this will also open up that Copilot experience. And kind of the default experience you'll see there is going to be the Copilot chat experience, where we can have prompts and kind of have the conversation with that tool as mentioned before. So when it comes to kind of building through AI or building through Copilot, we'll take the example that we have here on screen, where maybe I have this original document. It's only showing one page, but we'll pretend there's dozens of pages here. And it's all about enriching our employee experience. Maybe it's an onboarding guide or some kind of guidance or process documentation. Well, there are ways that I probably want to find that will efficiently help me summarize the document or break it down into different kinds of chunks that might be useful for creating trainings in the future, or something else that we can be creative with. So if we have this original document and we bring it into Copilot Chat, we can add it to our conversation as its kind of source, the thing that it's looking at, and we can have the conversation around. And we can just say, hey, summarize this document. And if we just ask it to simply do that, it has its own layout that it can do it. We can also ask summarize this document in bullet points or give it more guardrails or more of a framework of how we want things summarized or the kind of content we want included in the summary. You can be as specific or as broad as you want with this request. And then we can continue the conversation. So once we have the summary, maybe there's a few other ways we want to continue changing this document. So maybe we want to reformat it with a different output. So like I said originally, maybe we want to take that original document from the multiple pages of just this onboarding documentation, and we want to say, create a one-pager that I can send in an email. Or we can reframe for a different audience. Maybe you want to take this from a general audience sort of document to decision makers or maybe managers, or explain specific details. Maybe I'm unsure about a section. I could say, hey, reframe this for me. Change it in a way that is easier to understand because I am maybe a novice in this topic, and it can do that for you. So getting started, let's go ahead and find Copilot first, and then coming up with a few more demos where we're going to dive deeper into how do we use these different locations. So I have a demo environment that I'm going to showcase that is a GCC-based demo tenant, and it is licensed with Copilot. So we can open Copilot in a bunch of different locations, as mentioned before. One of them is potentially the standalone Copilot application. So I would see that in my taskbar, or I can search for it in the search within Windows. But when I open this opens up a full screen experience for Copilot. And that's what this whole chat box is all about. I can start to prompt directly from here. Now, alternatively, if I open up my browser, so I use the Edge browser, and I go into, here we go, m365.cloud.microsoft, or whatever way you usually go to get into your M365 landing page like this. We'll have the new chat option here on the left-hand side, and it takes us into that Copilot chat experience. Looks just like the standalone desktop application. We also have options to open these in existing applications. So if I were to open up something like Outlook, at the top right of my Outlook experience, whether you're using new or the classic experience for Outlook, I would see this Copilot icon at the top right. Now, these icons can sort of pop up in two different ways. They'll either show up with extended functionality, like what we're going to see today, when we have licensed Copilot in our environment. But if it's just the basic Copilot chat licensing or just basic Copilot, you might still see the icon here, but it would only give you the basic features of kind of the conversational version of Copilot. You're not going to be able to access work-focused documents from there, for example, unless you upload them yourself. So, for example, maybe I want to go into the chat and I'm going to give it a prompt right away just to give us a general response so we can see it in action. So I'll say draft and opening. And as I start to type, you might actually already notice how it's going to potentially give us some suggestions based on maybe other things that we've done in previous chats or documents it has access to. So keep that in mind as you start to type. But maybe I'm going through the opening paragraph of an after action report for a hypothetical project that ran into several unexpected delays. Still needs to sound professional. Oops, professional, there we go. And optimistic. So before I even hit go, something that is really important when we are prompting, and this is kind of a preview to some of the best practices, is I'm not just saying draft the opening paragraph of an after action report. I'm giving it more context. So maybe it's a hypothetical project, so I'm giving it the runway to make up something. But I'm also saying we ran into several unexpected delays, but I still want it to, and we're going to provide it with a tone, I want it to sound professional. I want it to sound optimistic. And I could have changed it to, I want it to sound very stern and very concise, or however I want it to write. But once we hit go, we're going to give Copilot the opportunity to think through its kind of process. And so just like any other chat, you can think of it like a text message conversation. Your responses will show up to the right-hand side of the window, and Copilot's responses will show up to the left. So we're going to give it an opportunity to figure this out. And sometimes, obviously, it could take a minute to kind of find out what it wants to say. You also notice at the very top, while it's thinking, I have this work toggle and this web toggle, and I can switch between these two. And these are called grounding toggles. So this just means that one of them is going to be based off of information it has access to that's within my working environment. This is something that's part of the licensed experience of Copilot. And then there's the web experience where I'm only telling it to look out into the web. So if it's the work experience, then it'll look in kind of both. But if I just say web, that means it's only going to go out to websites. It's only going to go outside of my working environment to find some kind of answers. So maybe I'm doing research on building a training about Microsoft Teams or something. Well, I can go on the web to find content for me to have that conversation. And here we go. So here's a polished opening paragraph that we can use. No enterprise data directly addressed your creative writing requests. So I drafted a fresh paragraph without citing internal content. And it's mentioning internal content because we had it toggled to that work toggle here at the top. If we had it set to web, it would have just done a regular prompt. So I'd be able to read through this and say, despite encountering several unforeseen delays, and so on, we have the rest of our message that we can use there. So this could be a starting point. If we trust it and we think it feels good, we can just copy it into our tools and start to use those as our responses. Or maybe I'm going to paste in an existing response, something I've already written, and it would give me a chance to say, hey, can you grammar check this for me? And this could be really useful for users with dyslexia. And I have talked to people who use Copilot for that reason. We're just going to double check what they're writing or maybe help them change their tone and whatnot. If we ever need to, we can also continue this conversation just by going back down into the message Copilot window because we're still in the same chat. And so it's going to refer to all of the previous parts of the conversation as we move forward in its own responses. Copilot also offers at the very bottom of the response some suggestions. So maybe make it more formal, tailor it for a software project, add a positive closing sentence or something else that's going to be related to this particular output. So that's one way of using chat, but there are plenty of other examples that we can dive into. When we think about content creation inside of Copilot, there's kind of 3 steps that we can go through to get this going. We would, like we just saw in that previous example, enter our prompt. So we'd enter some kind of detailed prompt and look for a reply from that prompt. We want to be as detailed as possible in those instructions. So think of them as instructions. You're asking it to help you build something. So create that email that we just talked about, or the starting of an SOP, or some other kind of important thing that you're building, right? So you want to make sure that Copilot has the appropriate guardrails up that matter to you and make sense to what you're building from the very beginning if possible. And then you would check the sources. If you're having it look at certain information, it'll provide sources throughout that conversation. So it is transparent about where the information is coming from, especially if you ask it to provide sources. So this isn't just we have to trust everything that the output gives us. We can say, hey, where'd you find that information? We don't see a source. Or in my original prompt, I can say, provide me with sources at the end of this, or link to where you found this information, just so we can verify it ourselves. And then finally, we can continue that conversation, as I mentioned in that previous example, where we can ask follow-up questions about maybe changing the tone, changing the audience. Maybe I want it to be written shorter or give different kinds of details. This isn't just I put an input in, gives me an output, end of conversation. It's an iterative process where we can make this something that can be impactful, even if it's not something we might find usable out of the very first output. So let's take a look at some examples of ways that we can leverage this tool to create content. One of them would be creating emails and messages. I'd already mentioned the example of some folks using this to help with maybe dyslexia, but you can use it just to build your own kinds of information like we saw in my original example, where I just give it a prompt as a starting point. So Copilot helps you quickly turn those ideas into clear and professional emails and messages. And I find myself even using this at times too. If I am not quite sure with the wording of something, or maybe I'm about to message a customer and I want to make sure I'm landing my message, because sometimes you just don't feel super comfortable or super confident in what you've written that day. So a few examples that we see here are draft a short professional email explaining a new policy to my team. Remember, we want to be specific in these prompts, so we want to ensure that we say what that policy is. We provide documentation along with our prompt to ensure it knows what we're talking about. And we'll see an example of something similar to that in a moment. Write an email updating stakeholders on next steps and timelines. So again, we want to make sure that we are referring to the proper documentation for this. This can help us get that ball rolling to ensure that we're informing the right parties of something that's happening. Or create a clear and concise email requesting additional information by a deadline. So we'll even start to put some structure in there and maybe ask us follow-up questions. Hey, what is the deadline? So I can put it in there for us. So Copilot can ask you questions back if you ask it to. Also treat it as a writing coach. So Copilot can act as a writing coach, helping to quickly adjust tone and improve clarity. So rewrite this email to be clear and more professional. There might even be suggestions, especially if we're using tools or using Copilot within tools like Outlook, where whenever you select the text and you're going to go into the Copilot experience, it will provide us with the opportunity to then say auto rewrite or rewrite for clarity or make more concise. Improve the tone of a message to sound more collaborative or suggest a stronger subject line for this email. So kind of asking it for an opinion based on the contents of the message. So let's go ahead and check those out. All right, here we are back in my demo environment. This time I'm going to open up Outlook. Here's my experience inside of Outlook, where I already have maybe a message open. Actually remove this Copilot chat for a moment because I had that open when I was testing some stuff. But you'll see that I'm inside of my Outlook experience, where I'd be able to still see my inbox, all the message that I have open on the right-hand side. So what you'd expect. But we do have this Copilot button here at the top right. Copilot also pops up in new messages. So if I go to open up a new email, you'll see that I have a few different places that Copilot could pop up. One, you might see suggestions for Copilot at the top left where it says, need a hand with this email? Try coaching by Copilot. At the top right, I have that Copilot button there, and it'll open up Copilot in a window to the right-hand side, and I can start to prompt here. Or inside of the message itself, it might say start typing or help me write. And there's also a keystroke where it says Alt-I. And if I do that, it'll bring up a draft with Copilot window inside of my message. So there's a few different places where we can bring this into our experience. So I'm actually going to use the one on the right-hand side because I do want to refer to some documentation in what I want to do. So in this message, I'm going to say draft a short, professional email explaining this policy to my team. And then what you can do is add some documentation to this prompt. So I have this little plus symbol at the bottom left, where I can add work content, upload images or files, or attach cloud files, so I can grab files from different locations. So if I were to go into add work content, what it does is it'll pop up with just a short list of things that could be available to me here, or I can search items. So if I maybe do employee onboarding, there we go. So there's my employee onboarding policy. And then I can hit send. So now it's going to think, and what it does, it has to review the data that it was given. And it's going to help me draft that email. So here's a polished professional email you can send and then base it off that document. And so it'll have the subject line of introducing our employee onboarding policy. So let me grab that and I can put it in the subject. And you can just simply copy paste it over. And the demo account that I'm using, her name is Sarah, so that's why you'll see Sarah pop up in this. Now, in some cases, there might be formatting adjustments you need to do, especially if you're copying from the Copilot side into the message, or if you drafted directly inside of the body text, then the formatting would usually come through correctly. But just in case, I can still go through and add my returns here, just so we see some nice separation between the content. And then once we're here, I can just send it. Or, as I always like to remind myself and remind others, make sure you review the content before you just blindly trust it. There's a whole other side of AI called hallucinations, where sometimes it might come up with content or fill in the gaps where it has incomplete data. So you just want to make sure it's not trying to make up anything based on the information you're providing it. So there we go. I think that looks pretty good. And maybe I have someone I can send this to. Off it goes, and now I've created this great email based off of the referenced document. Now, something else I can do is look for a conversation that has a number of replies or is a longer email thread. So I think this one works for me. I'm going to put that there. And with it selected, I can then prompt a reply off of this. So first off, at the top right of the email, I could see summarize. And Summarize offers me the option to get caught up on this email thread. So if I'm added to an email thread way later on in the chain, maybe I want to have it summarized to me just so I better understand what's happening before I try and make my own replies. Especially if this is a very long thread, maybe I don't want to have to read through every single word of it. This can be a really helpful, kind of time-efficient way of getting caught up. But if I go through the reply process, now I'm going to make this pop out into its own message just so it's easier for us to see. I can use that Copilot button again at the top right, or if I see that this help me write option with the Alt-I, I can click that and it'll have one of two options, either pop up as that side chat, or I'm just going to hit Alt-I in the window here. Now I'm going to actually ask it to help me work with this email from here. So I'll select this existing chat and say, create a clear, concise reply to this email thread, requesting additional information by the end of, we'll do this. We'll say by a deadline of the end of July. So let's go and send that. And here we go. But what's really interesting about this experience is it gives us a chance to read through the message. It might be a little small on your end, but there is a message there that I can read through. So it's, hello, team. Thank you for keeping everyone informed. It'll actually ask that we have everything set up by July 31st. But I have the option to change something in the anything you'd like to change section. So that's a way of iterating on what it already created, just by asking it to maybe adjust the tone, add something to it, remove something from an updated version. But then we also have at the very bottom some really important buttons. So we have keep, which will keep this message, put it into the body of the email, and then I can send it from here. I have discard, which will just completely delete it. But then I have regenerate, which will rewrite it in a different way. So it's same information that came from my original prompt, but it's going to just rewrite it. So maybe I don't like the first draft and have it write it again. Or I can go into adjust. And adjust is that environment I mentioned earlier where we can have it make some minor adjustments based on a dropdown. So I can say, make it longer, make it shorter, make it sound more formal or direct or more casual, maybe make it a poem. I don't know when that would be appropriate, but it's an option for you there if it's something you want to have fun with. But maybe I want to say, make it sound more casual. It'll rewrite it, but what's really nice about this is at the very top left of this box, it gives me the ability to click through the different prompts that I have come up with, and I can choose from there. So maybe I like the more casual one, I can hit keep, and it hasn't actually sent anything yet. So I can still read through it. I can make my own manual adjustments to this, or if you actually highlight over certain blocks of text, there's a rewrite option that'll pop up in the little text box, and that'll bring up a little rewrite option below where I can say, hey, this is how I want it to be rewritten. And it'll take those instructions for whatever the selected text is and rewrite it. So make this shorter, make it longer, make it sound like a pirate, whatever these different changes are, you can adjust them there. So maybe I think that already sounds good. I'll send it off and we're good to go. So whether I am using the chat feature at the top right to originally draft an email and referring to some information for it to help me draft that email, or I'm using it in my replies to maybe summarize information and create something that's going to be more relevant to that particular conversation, Copilot can pop up in all of these different places to really help me out. You can still use the Copilot chat if I were to click the Copilot option at the top right. Maybe I just click the web, so it's not even going to reference work files anymore. It's just going to look through anything web-based. I can treat this as a regular Copilot experience. So I can ask it or prompt it in more general ways, or I can ask it to do things more Outlook specific, like summarize a email, like we have already talked about before. So you still have the flexibility of using it in whatever capacity you want, depending on the application that you're in. So one other thing that we can do as well, another place that this will pop up for us, is actually inside of Teams. So if I close Outlook and I open up my Teams experience, this is another one of those places you'll potentially see Copilot pop up all over the place. And Copilot has kind of two icons, just to share this with everyone if you're not already aware. There's the general Copilot, kind of rainbowy square diamond icon that we've seen so far. That'll usually be shown as an outline, kind of like we see at the top right of this window. Or it'll be two little stars, maybe next to a pencil or a pen, or just next to something as the two little stars. And that usually means there's some level of AI or Copilot integration there. But an example that I can show that a lot of us can benefit from are Teams meetings and how recaps can have a level of AI integration in them with Copilot. Now, if I were to open up a meeting after it's happened, usually if I want to open up the details of that meeting, I'll be able to find it in the chat of my Teams experience. And so maybe this operations sync persona session, I can scroll through if there's been all of this conversation that was had. I'd be able to view the chat there, maybe files that have been stored based on the resources found at the top of that window. But there's also an option for recap. So if the meeting itself was recorded and there was a transcript available, recap has an AI summary that can come along with it. So this meeting could be 5 minutes or it could be an hour or two long. This recap, as long as, again, it was recorded, at the very least, a transcript is available, I'll be able to pop in and see this AI summary section. So it'll show me, okay, propulsion data validation timeline adjustment. And it goes in order, but it also puts them into sections. Or it'll say, okay, Michael and Sophia discussed a minor timeline adjustment, and then go to the next section, next section. What's really nice about this too is if I click some of these, they'll break out and show you more details of that particular part of the conversation. So it'll have a kind of spark notes at the very top, the highlights of that part of the conversation, but then when I open it up, I can see more details underneath. So definitely recommend checking that out in your own Teams experience if you haven't already seen it. And just to show it off, show that it's here, you'll end up seeing Copilot in a number of different places. Ours happens to be at the top left of the navigation within Teams. It could be further down on the list, or it could be hiding in the All Apps section. But this is essentially that Copilot chat experience that we saw in the browser or as the standalone app, but baked right into the Teams experience. And this is also something that can be accessed inside of our chats or writing messages as well, kind of like the drafting experience that we saw inside of Outlook. Now, coming back into our deck, and again, as I go through today, if you do have any of your own suggestions or any thoughts or any questions, please use the chat in our meeting. I'm more than happy to check those out as we're going through today. But next would be drafting documents. So this is where Copilot can really shine when we need to create something maybe more structured, especially quickly. And this is, again, one of those things that I like to use to create a first draft just to give me some ideas. And then I'll usually handle it myself the rest of the way, but this is a great base to start from. So to see the examples that we have here, maybe we want to create a one-page project status document with sections for overview, progress to date, risks, and upcoming milestones. And we could potentially refer to a certain file that we have access to, or maybe something that we are already working on in an existing chat. We can add that as a later prompt to maybe create something new for us. I can draft a professional introduction explaining the purpose, scope, and intended audience of this document. So it'd be something I'm referring to. Or turn this policy into a clear, easy to understand FAQ using plain language. So it's breaking down something that could be a really long policy or procedural document that could be dozens of pages long. You can break down into a really easy to understand FAQ. And you can even adjust the tone of this as well. The nature of Copilot and its conversational approach allows you to iterate super easily. And there's other tools like report writing. So Copilot can help you pull insights together quickly. You can extract key information and organize that information in a way that's just going to be more time efficient than if you were having to scrape through all of it yourself. So whether we're going to have it summarize and look for key lessons of a reference document, pulling together key metrics and outcomes from maybe an Excel report or a table that is based within Excel, or creating a table listing major milestones, descriptions, so taking information and building a table out of it. There are different ways that we can create this usually insightful or actionable type of documentation or information. So let's see some of these kind of reporting assistant style demos. So I'm going to go back into my browser. I'm going to use Copilot from there, and I'm also going to start a new chat. That's another one of those tips that we'll mention is as you are going through these different conversations, if you feel that you're going to change directions, or maybe you're going to change to a new task, don't continue that in the same chat, because in that same chat window, it's going to try and use all of the previous contexts and previous parts of the conversation in its upcoming or future outputs. So if you go radically in a different direction and start to prompt it with something else, then you're now crossing the wires or having different conversations meshing together. So whenever you're moving into a different task, like I am now, just use the new chat button at the top left or this top right kind of blue chat button, or wherever you see a new chat button on your end, you'll be able to open it up this way. So while we have this open, what we want to do is create a one-page, let's see, so it's create a one-page brief. There's a suggestion here. I'll do create a one-page project status document with sections for overview, progress to date, risks, and upcoming milestones. And we're going to have it refer to a certain document. So that's where we're going to add this document as its source and that plus symbol. And so I'm just going to upload a file from here. So I'm going to look for it on my computer. I could have also done the search option before because it is in my OneDrive. So it just depends on how you want to look for the files. You can also click and drag files into this window as well to add it to the prompt. But for this case, I believe I have it on my desktop. Yeah, there we go. And this one is, let me double check which one I want to use. Use the meeting transcript. So there we go. And now we're going to send it off. It asks for a one-page project status document, these specific kind of instructions on how it's made. And there we go. Now it's going to create that for us based on the original document. And you'll see it has all of these different little sourcing spots. Well, because we're accessing just one file, it's sourcing in all these different places of the same file. But we also have the option that says, would you like this formatted as a Word document or a PDF? Or do you need any additional sections? Well, I can say, format it as a Word doc. This is one of those nice things with the ability to create content using Copilot because of its integration with everything else Microsoft. I have the ability to leverage it to make things for me that I can easily either copy paste out, like if I just want to take that output, or in this case, I'm asking it to essentially make me a Word document that I can just download and off I go. So it'll take the information it created earlier and format it in a way that it'll be an appropriate looking Word document. So it does take a little bit more time to actually create a file type. So I can talk about my next example as that's being created. Or actually, looks like it jumped in for me. There we go. Oh, so it didn't complete. So it looks like it created or ran into a formatting error. But normally what would happen is it would create a downloadable document for us. And we'd have the opportunity to just take that and use it wherever we need to. But now it's in a Word document. It's out of this experience. Or I can always copy paste this directly from this window. So creating a new chat here. Maybe there is another one that we want to do. Kind of double checking my examples to see which one would be really useful for us here. So maybe I want to turn this policy into a clear, concise, clear and easy to understand. Understand FAQ using plain language. And we use the onboarding document that we had earlier. So there we go. And there it is. There's our FAQ. And this is another one of those things where I can ask it to export it as a PDF or make a Word document or expand it, keep adding to it as well with different iterations. So you have a lot of flexibility on this. Now, so far, I've just shown you adding these Word documents as the source for the prompt, right? And I can add multiple things at a time as well. So maybe I want to have multiple documents that are of similar context and bring them together and asking it to analyze them and find differences and whatnot. But if I want to come in and do a new chat, I did see a question pop up on my other screen. I'll check that in just a moment after this prompt. So maybe, for example, I will do this. So I'll say, based on this report, summarize key lessons learned and recommendations. And if I go to upload files this time, I can take a look at some feedback submissions. So this is an Excel file. So let's see what it provides us here. So now it just gives us in plain language, and I can ask it to summarize it in a more simple to understand way as well, because maybe I'm somebody who hasn't interacted with this feedback submissions document quite yet, and I want to get a really high level view of it. But it says key lessons learned, customer experience is strong but not uniform. Recurring themes and feedback is the ambiance and freshness of this. It looks like this is for a restaurant. Some employee performance, and then recommendations, expand the dessert menu, improve service speed. So this does help us understand from the numbers in plain language something a little bit better. All right. So we have a question. What do you recommend for prompts when you want Copilot to generate a diagram, like a process workflow? Sometimes it can complete it visually, but offers some written code. So a simple way to state it that will assist it visually, so Mermaid being referenced. Honestly, I haven't tried making diagrams, so I think that leveraging the image creation side of it would probably be your first best bet, kind of like what you're already referring to. But I'd say also leveraging, maybe we're creating a diagram of, I know like an org chart is a really popular one. Might not be your specific example, but this is one that came up in the training from yesterday, where you can have the org chart written out as manager, and then the bullet is going to be someone who reports to them and a list of those people, and maybe one of those people has an assistant, so there'd be another indent for that person. And you can explicitly say how you want the image or how you want the org chart to be created based on, okay, anyone who's one indent in, I want it to be the first layer, and then anyone who's going to be two indents in will be this next layer. You're going to give it really, really specific diagrams. You can even add an image to it and say, I want it to be formatted just like this. So I'm making an org chart. Now, on the flip side of this, what you could also do is work with the AI tool to help you build a prompt. So I know that might sound counterintuitive, but what we're going to do is say, this is what I want to achieve. This is what I need to build. This is what I have so far. Help me build a prompt and walk me through and ask me the appropriate questions so you can eventually build me something that fits all of these needs. And that can help you out a lot. I know a lot of people who will use this kind of prompt assistance as a tool to ensure that you're building a prompt that the AI can actually utilize, or that it understands the best that it can. So potentially going through and creating an image that way using one of the AI-focused prompts that it makes could maybe bring you to a different result. You're welcome. Oops, go back. We would do one other prompt where we're going to refer to those documents. So maybe we have, let's see, pull key metrics and outcomes from these reports and present them in a simple table. So I'm going to find these files, and let's see what kind of reports I have. So I have a budget plan and last 3 years of financial data. We'll see what this does for us. All of this is a demo environment, so these might not be the most intertwined or related, bits of documentation, but we'll see if it's able to create something for us. All right, we're going to give it just a moment to see that. I'm going to see what other examples I might have that are going to be in the time that we have, so I can showcase a couple more things. So still planning. This is the code that it's going to use in the background. I might show you this at times. You're not necessarily going to do anything with this unless you have applications for coding. So it's Python that ran up. I don't speak Python. I don't write it, but it is something where in case you do, you can always jump in and grab that and use it yourself in something else if you ever need to make adjustments. But looks like the rest of the examples I have as well, so we'll pop back into the deck after it shows this one, would be similar to some of the content we've already shown, where instead of building out content directly in chat, we can go into Word and have it create the content directly in Word as opposed to exporting that file. So that could be a more streamlined experience there. So creating new documents based on policy documentation and whatnot. So just like what we're showing here, but doing it directly inside of Word. But let's see what it gave us. So here we go. So Contoso, annual financial summaries, totals by year. So it gave me the table, and then notes and outcomes. And then it looks like it created a separate table for monthly spend snapshot. Give me some notes and outcomes. So it kept things nice and separate for us. But this also works in the other direction. So maybe I have a Word document that I want to put in here, and I want it to create a table, or I want it to create some kind of Excel focused document based on metrics shown inside of that. Maybe I have a study and I'm using that documentation. That could be really useful. Then the final thing that we'll touch on is the creation of presentations and visual content. So this could kind of go in line with the question we had a little bit ago, where inside of PowerPoint, in this case, or if we're using the chat and then taking that experience into PowerPoint, we can prompt a few different ways to have Copilot help us make these visual things that we might be presenting, or just using as maybe collateral or signage or whatever it might be. I know of one of my GCC customers that will use this to create the outlines for their presentations they're going to build inside of PowerPoint. Or they'll go into PowerPoint, have it build them a kind of basic outline of what they're building, and like slides and whatnot, and then they'll go in and add all the content afterwards. But as it says here, Copilot can create the structured presentation-ready slides with clear messaging. So some example prompts would be generate a PowerPoint presentation based on an attached document with specific title slides, content slides, and a conclusion. You can recommend speaker notes for each slide to help explain the content to a general audience. I've used this one where if I'm not quite sure how to articulate something, instead of me just spinning my wheels, I'll ask Copilot to help me be more concise about maybe the notes I've already written, or to help me distill down what's important. And then review this presentation and suggest improvements for accessibility, clarity, and audience engagement. I've also used this one where I've asked it, hey, what am I missing? This is what I'm trying to train. This is what I'm trying to showcase. Tell me where my gaps are. And then can I create new slides based on that? And generating visual content. So this is another way of leveraging Copilot where instead of it just creating tables or text-based content, you can have it create images. So Copilot can create or generate visual elements like images, diagrams to simplify the sharing of ideas and communications. So some example prompts there are create an infographic that summarizes the key points from this presentation or from this document that I add as a reference. Generate a simple process diagram that visually explains this workflow. So sort of similar to what we talked about before. Maybe this is something that aligns with what you're doing, but it sounds like yours might be a little more complex than a simple diagram. And then create a visual from this report that would support the message in this presentation. So you're being a little more broad, but since you're giving it the document or the file to reference, I feel like that would be enough information to build off of. So with our last few minutes, I'll show you just a couple examples here, probably one of each, just so we have an idea of what we can build. So I can either start from Copilot chat to give me some instructions, or I can open up the desktop application. So let's go and actually open up PowerPoint. Now inside of PowerPoint, I just open up a blank presentation. There we go. You'll see at the top left of the very first slide, I have this little star icon. Now, again, these stars can kind of pop up wherever. So in PowerPoint, if you see them, these are the controls it'll give you, where you can create a presentation with files. That means you're starting from a file, or you can ask Copilot. So you're asking it just general Copilot questions. And that Copilot button is also there at the top right. So maybe I want to create a presentation with file. Well, this is me creating a presentation about, and then I would just look for the file that I want to reference. So I would just do, I keep doing this onboarding file, so maybe I can choose that. It'll pop up for me here. Maybe I might have to go looking for it. So I think for now, I'll just use project management report. I'll go and do that. Otherwise, what I could have done is inside of the Copilot chat, if I'm having kind of a hard time finding it here, I'd be able to create it from the Copilot chat and have it export it as a PowerPoint file. So similar experience. So create a presentation about this file with a title slide, example slides, and a wrap-up slide. Make it 6 slides long. Sure. And so now it's going to generate this information for us. So while it's prompting, I'll see if I can do double duty just because of time constraints here. I'm going to go back into chat, new chat, and then I can look at my information that I have here. So let's go. And we'll do this new hire benefits, employee benefits FAQ. So maybe if I add this to the prompt, oops, I'll have to find it this way, it looks like. Actually use one of these. Okay, so new hire benefits enrollment instructions. Create a diagram that supports this attached document and simply illustrates the process. So that's prompting there. Let's pop back into PowerPoint and see what it got us. So you see, it says Scorpio Unleashed Project Management Overview, and it has a few slide ideas for us here. So once I do generate slides, now it's going to go through the process of creating these slides. And I'm going to kind of pop between both windows so you can see both of them in action. But this one, again, it's going to take a little bit, and that's something to keep in mind with either larger data sets or larger files it's referencing. You might want to summarize. That could take a little bit longer for the prompt to work through. Or when you're creating content that's more visually focused, it could take a while as well, like what we're seeing right now. So there it is. If I were to show this in the regular slide, so Scorpio Unleashed, and I can always go in and change the theme to this if I need to, or go in and make individual adjustments, but it's added tables to this, it's added some relevant information and put it in different sections. This could be a great starting point. And then I can even go up and prompt and say, hey, what am I missing here? Maybe recommend additional information that I could use. Now, if we pop back into our other prompt that says create a diagram that supports the attached file, which is the new hires benefits. So I can say prepare. So actually just click it so we can see it all together. Prepare, enroll, get confirmation. That one's pretty simple. But I could have prompted to just create an image or create something that is more visually interesting, or create a flyer out of it, or whatever it could be. This is just meant to be a very simple diagram, but this could be expanded to create something much more complex, especially if I were to provide it with maybe a visual reference. So saying, hey, I want it to look something like this based on this original file. And I can just download this, I can copy it and use it in maybe that presentation that I just built. So it's definitely up to you. So absolutely recommend popping in and trying to create images, diagrams, even presentations with these prompts. There's a lot here that you can play with. So to do a little bit of wrap up here in our final couple minutes, what makes an effective prompt? Well, I'll give you the highlights on this one. An effective prompt is going to be more specific and detailed. You're giving it full sentences for instructions. You're giving it kind of a story to follow. What are the guardrails that make the most sense for what you're trying to do? You're not going to give it one sentence and hope it figures it out. You're going to give it all of the little nuances to what you're trying to achieve. Because a less effective one is a very vague prompt with just a few words, no complete sentences, and there's no context. There's no document that's being attached to it. So the more information you give it, the better chance it has to get closer to your desired goal. And if you see the prompt gallery, go ahead and go through that as well and see what suggestions Copilot offers. Now, as we leave for today, something I want you to think of, whether you're going to share it in the chat or just something to keep in mind as you go through your next prompting experience, is what's one task that you regularly do that starts with a blank page that you'd now consider using Copilot to help draft first. So if anyone has any examples, I'd love to hear them here in this last minute or two of our session. I know for me, whenever I go to build my presentations for trainings, I like to start now from my own kind of ideas around what I want to build, and then I'll give those to AI to say, hey, again, what am I missing? I see construct a professional email. I love that. So there's some days where I really just don't feel like trying to think with my professional brain and everything's more casual. So Copilot can help me stay in lines for that, which is awesome. Now imagine that there's plenty of other examples out there as well. Creating lesson cheat sheets. Yes, absolutely. That one is actually a great thing to think of too. So I know I'm on the thank you screen, but just to wrap up, taking some information that you're going to feed into the AI tool and have it, or Copilot, and have it help you better understand these things, or quick reference guides. So I'm going to post a poll really quick into the chat. Just lets us know what you think of the content for today. So it's just going to be a 1 through 5 star, asking, did this training meet your needs or your expectations? So let me put that into the chat for us. I do appreciate your time today. I know we're going to be right at time by the time I send this. So this training, your needs. And I'll actually just say, I realized that my 5 stars thing isn't here, so I'll just say 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and we'll go from there. And you'll see that pop up in the chat in just a moment. And I do see some reactions coming up from the conversation, so thank you so much for those as well. So you can let me know what you think in the poll in the chat. I know that we're right at time. We do appreciate the feedback. So just launch Copilot with confidence. In case you need any help, us here at Planet are happy to help you. So just please go ahead and let us know at info@go-planet.com. All right, everybody. You can always submit that chat as well from the chat section, even once the call is over, at least for now. But I want to thank you all so much for being here. Hopefully you learned something of value, found something interesting to take back into your working environment, and hopefully see you in a future session. All right, have a great day. Take care.